for white separatists at Auburn, but does not believe that any race can be said to be superior to any other, let alone support any form of aggressive violence. In fact, he thinks that his solution of allowing free association, separatism, and secession for any groups that want it will actually diffuse the racial and political tensions that are spreading in the U.S. He will argue that the skinheads you will see in the movie that we're about to show are not representative of the modern alt-right, and that they are instead the product of brutal prison warfare resulting from different races being forced together with no escape. So with that, we have Mr. Wyatt Mann. Wyatt, all yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. And I'd like to, let's see, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect, perfect. So I would like to give a huge shout out to Dr. Thomas, first of all. I know that he doesn't in any way endorse my views, but he absolutely believes in something that's very important, and that is dialogue and free speech, and that it can actually help diffuse tensions instead of forcing people to the sidelines. So I have a quick poll for you guys, and we're going to be talking about some kind of brutal subjects here, but first one's not very nice. There are about 90,000 rapes of women reported in the United States each year to the police. Who has a guess as to how many rapes of men occur in the United States? Probably less, but how much do you guys think? Someone give me a guess.
One person said 65.
65, okay.
No, sorry, it's just 1/6 of that amount.
Okay, 1/6. Okay. Anyone else have any guesses? It's actually well over 90,000. It's about 50% more at 140,000 just in U.S. prisons alone. That's not even counting rapes outside, which are probably a lot less than 90,000. Okay, so prisons are pretty brutal. I mean, we probably know that they're very overcrowded in Alabama, for instance, and facilities are often not very nice. There's no air conditioning, for instance. But other prisons around the country are regarded as luxurious in physical standards, but not really in social standards. Now, our group has gotten some threats that hint at another factor in prison rape. We've been told, for instance, in comments on the Plainsman, we hope that you like dark meat in prison. What does that mean? Well, let me tell you a story of one prisoner in Indiana. He says, I've been sentenced for a DUI offense, my third one. I'm a tall white male who unfortunately has a small amount of feminine characteristics and am very shy. These characteristics have got me raped so many times, I have no more feelings physically. I've been raped by up to 5 black men at a time. I probably have AIDS now. I have great difficulty raising food to my mouth from shaking after nightmares or thinking so hard on all of this. I've laid down without a physical fight to be sodomized, to prevent so much damage and struggles, ripping and tearing. Though I'm not fighting, it caused my heart and spirit to be raped as well. Something I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for. So that's an anecdote, and clearly I do not believe something dumb like, I don't think all black people are rapists. I don't even think all black people in prison are going to rape white people. That would be silly. And I'm not here to guilt trip black people the way the modern left likes to guilt trip white people. Not at all. Well, that's just an anecdote. How about, let's ask the Human Rights Watch if there's a pattern. Now, for those who don't know, the Human Rights Watch is a rather left-wing organization. One of its biggest causes is protecting homosexual people from being bullied, and I fully support the Human Rights Organization, by the way. We're not like right-wing partisans who can't listen to the left on anything. But what do they say? They say the most common type of rape in prison is black on white, and it is often motivated explicitly by racial hatred. And other studies have confirmed this. One foundation called Just Attention states that when researchers ask their targets to identify the aggressors at the time of the rape, about 80% were black, Some are Hispanic, about 14%, and a few are white, 6%. And they conclude that racial hatred of whites by blacks appears to be the main force driving prison rape. Now, if you know about statistics, you'll say, well, part of the reason there's such a big disparity is that there are a lot more black people in American prisons than white people. And by the way, this correlates very strongly with different levels of violent crime among different groups. Obviously, not every black person, or even a majority of black people, is a violent criminal. That'd be silly. But black people commit about 6 times the violent crime per capita than white people. And we can talk about why that is. We'll have a big question and answer section, by the way, if people are curious, what the evidence on that says. But here's another thing that's interesting. There's a growing Hispanic population in U.S. prisons, too. But there's not an epidemic of Hispanics being raped by black people or by white people. And that's not because those groups get along, by the way. If you've ever heard of the incredible tension in Los Angeles schools where black students and Hispanic students are forced together and they don't get along well at all, and there's often basically gang warfare at the schools, you'll understand that. So what is the difference? Well, there are very cohesive Mexican prison gangs, Hispanic prison gangs like MS-13, Florencia 13, Nuestra Familia, the Mexican Mafia. I read about a bunch of interesting ones. And of course, these gangs often protect their own at the time that a rape might occur, but they have an interesting way of negotiating with each other too. And other groups know that they'd better discipline their own and not have them raping other members of other ethnicities if there's a prison gang involved, because that'll result in gang warfare, which is very costly. Interestingly, there is tons of money being made in prisons, sadly, over illegal drugs. Probably 80% of prisoners are addicted to drugs, and those drugs come in through various ways, and these gangs make a ton of money off of it. And they actually kind of police their own and try to keep business as usual going. But with white people, a lot fewer join these prison gangs, even in prison. And it's a terrible tragedy that the only recourse for a white person who does not want to be raped to death is to join an organization like Aryan Brothers or some other skinhead gang. And the prison guards are not going to do anything about this. I read one warden who testified at a trial said that it's the prisoner's own responsibility to fight off sexual abuse. They had to let others understand they're not going to put up with it, so basically blaming the victim. Now, okay, so rape is a terrible problem in prison. How often do you guys think it's punished? What percentage of prisoners who commit a crime of rape do you think get punished for it? Let's see some guesses. What do you think there in the back?
Somebody said 5%.
5%. I wish it were 5%. According to Human Rights Watch, they've been unable to find a single case in which a prisoner has even been charged with rape, let alone convicted of it. So why are there prison gangs? Have there been prison gangs in America since 1776? Well, no, they seem to have arisen in the 1960s when we had huge social upheaval. We had a huge surge in crime, by the way. And our crime rates to this day are about 80% per capita higher than they were in 1960. And a lot of these prisons were being integrated. It was seen as the progressive, enlightened thing to do at the time. And originally there was just open warfare. There weren't even any gangs. And the situation was, if you can imagine, even worse than it is today. You just had riots and people being killed left and right. And slowly these gangs formed, and they actually reduced to violence, if you can believe it. It's kind of a sad state when gangs are doing something good, I guess. Well, okay. So, is there some easy way to have, black and white, Hispanic and black, whatever, get along in prison? Well, according to the Human Rights Watch, certain prison systems seem to have almost no positive social interaction, not even the most trivial, between people of different races. So prisons that see race as a very salient thing and have conflict about it, you can't even get someone to be civil to another person. Now, this is not to say in all prisons. Not all prisons have this epidemic, but most of them in America do. And in fact, federal judges have been trying to force prisoners to share a cell, like 2 or 4 people, with people only of different races. Like in Texas, a white guy has to have a non-white cellmate. That's just ludicrous. I mean, if whites are the aggressors instead of blacks, it would be equally ludicrous. Why are you forcing people together at the most minute level when they can't get along? Well, so that's so much for prisons. I mean, isn't the situation really different in America, though? Surely it's a lot better, right? Well, I have had several family members, extended and close, who went through very traumatic school busing incidents in the 1960s. Who's heard of school busing in America? Can you define it?
Essentially, from my understanding, my mom went through it, was basically when they were trying to integrate school street food, children of all races, mainly after civil rights movement, were trying to integrate equality education, and instead of actually properly rezoning anything, they just kind of picked up buses and kids from black schools, white schools, and vice versa. So you kind of run up a little bit of bus shuffling between schools as a form of integration.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. There were 2 kinds, and the more traumatic kind, which is what these people, my family, experienced, was when white people would be taken away from a white school to a heavily majority black school. And I'll talk about one guy. So, he grew up in a small town not very far from Auburn, and this small town was basically entirely white, so it was not like a brutal case of segregation where black people in this town had to go to a different school. It was just a white town. And when he was in the 7th grade, I guess it was probably the federal government required that he be bused for 2 hours one way to a place with a very heavily black school. And unfortunately, it was utter hell. White students at this school couldn't go to the bathroom if they weren't in groups of 3 because they could be jumped by people hanging around in the bathroom. There were guys who would masturbate themselves in class. One guy once tried to rape a teacher of his, and his parents quickly worked with other parents to form a private school, and he was able to graduate there. Of course, his parents had to pay taxes for the public school as well as for the private school, but they were able to avoid that, and eventually the very radical form of school busing, where white students were taken to black schools, was abandoned because it was very unpopular. We've had different versions. We can talk, where a few black students would be taken to white schools, and sometimes these were kind of the cream of the crop. If you guys have ever seen the very famous picture of maybe the first black student to attend a white school, he's got National Guard soldiers marching behind him. Sure, he's an educated, smart, well-behaved guy. You can see it on his face. And I wish to God all people were like that, but they're just different people in different groups. Well, okay, there's also something more subtle going on, but I think it's equally destructive, and that is the federal government has waged a war on white neighborhoods since the 1960s. And a perfect example would be a neighborhood that a person who spoke to our group, who lives in Opelika, told us about. Now, originally, her grandparents and parents grew up in this neighborhood. It was a very working class neighborhood, but people were well connected. It was safe. You knew your neighbors. You were friendly with your neighbors. You felt like you belonged. You could play outside in the day. And it's completely changed. A lot of the white people have moved. I believe Section 8 is in the neighborhood, and it's forcing the neighborhood to take in some diversity. And people just don't interact with each other. It's dangerous. They watch TV or sit around on their computers. It's kind of a microcosm of what's happening to a lot of America. And why is this happening? Well, we have government programs like Section 8